when you see these companies being sued by the major labels, I mean, the
Yeah.
major labels already are making millions of dollars. It's the
Yeah.
independent up and coming artists that need to be cared for, I think.
Yes.
And somehow it's always the big guys making these things, like
Yes.
the fuss about it. So and for me, for example, like the way that AI benefited my career was insanely amazing. That
Yeah.
I just wouldn't want anything to hurt these companies in a way,
Mm.
because they have provided me a new source of well, first of all, this new project that I'm working on, and in a way, like I am able to now generate new repertoire that was never written for the piano and actually play them on stage.
What's going on? Welcome to the New Music Business. I'm your host, Ari Herstand, author of How to Make It in the New Music Business, the book. Third edition is out now everywhere, all formats, hardcover, ebook, audiobook, however you like to consume books, you can find the book. Today, my guest is AyseDeniz, and she is a classical pianist, an incredible classical piano player. She's performed all over the world, most famously, most recently at the Walt Disney Music Hall in Los Angeles. She has also won the Best Contemporary Classical Composition at the Hollywood Independent Music Awards. What we talk about today, actually, we talk a little bit about the classical music industry at the start and kind of her upbringing and background. But the second half of this interview is where we really get into the AI discussion and how she has used AI. And let's just take a listen to one of her co-compositions with AI and herself. So that was a piece called Equinox 3050, and if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see how she kind of uses a lot of these AI programs, from visual programs to, of course, the audio programs. This is a co-composition, but we talk about, she has this project called Classical Regenerated, where she's using these music generation programs, specifically Udio and Suno, to create classical piano pieces that are inspired by or influenced by, or in the style of, I should say, kind of Chopin and Bach and Vivaldi and Mozart. And she talks about how she does this, specifically how she gets into it, why she's citing it, how she's doing it. But the thing is that's kind of setting her apart from everybody else using these technologies right now, is that she is a classically trained, masterful, professional piano player. She is playing all of this. So whenever you're hearing this music, what we just heard and what you're going to hear throughout, because we play some of her works, that's her actually playing the piano. It is a real human being. That is her playing the piano. She's an incredible pianist. That being said, we all know this technology can generate incredible music, and she talks about these compositions that the AI is creating and how there is an emotional component to it. And towards the end, I really encourage you to stick around to the very, very end. I know this was a slightly longer episode than we're used to, but that's because we really got into it. And we have different opinions on the ethics of AI and some of these AI platforms and how they are training their models, how they should be or shouldn't be licensing the music that they're using to train their models, and what these programs can be used for and how they can be used. I find a very fascinating her take on this. So I would encourage you to stick around to the very end, where we really, really get into it. And I know there's going to be a lot of you that are going to disagree, especially if there's anyone from the major publishers or major labels listening to this today, because they're the ones that are actually suing these programs that she's using, that we're talking about. But as an independent musician, as an independent composer, classical musician, a real human musician, I would argue that her opinion matters, even if the major labels and the major publishers vehemently disagree with it. And there's a reason that they disagree with it, and we talk about it. So, very fascinating conversation. This is the first time that I have ever had a classical musician, exclusively classical musician, on the show, and really one of the first times that we've dove this deep into the AI music creation discussion with an independent artist who's actually using it to create and perform, and she's performing these creations on quite big stages. She performed and gave a talk at CogX, which I would encourage you to look this up, this CogX performance and discussion, where she encourages the audience to vote on which piece was a human composition, which piece was a Chopin composition, and which piece was the AI composition. And it's really interesting. She will be speaking at many more tech conferences and much bigger stages in the near future. So follow her wherever you follow artists. It's AyseDeniz. We'll link to her in the show notes, and you can find her on Facebook, where she's built up her largest audience, on YouTube, on Instagram, on TikTok, on all the platforms. You can find all of us that make the show happen at Ari's Take, on Instagram, TikTok, of course, YouTube, Threads, X, all of that stuff. Right now, if you could pause this episode and leave us a 5-star review, however you're listening to this, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, give us a thumbs up on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, follow button if you want this show to populate your feed. But right now, pause this, visit aristake.com, sign up on the email list, get on the email list. That's how we can stay in touch, and that's where you'll get all the updates on the new music business. All right, let's kick into the show. AyseDeniz, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So you are officially the first classical musician that I have ever had on the show in over 150 episodes, 4 years running this thing. So I guess that's a failure on my part for not having more classical musicians, but I'm honored that it's you. So thank you for being that, for forging into these waters that we've normally just laid within, like the contemporary pop music industry. And now I'm so happy to talk a little bit classical. You know, I was classically trained. I'm a classically trained trumpet player, and so
What?
I mean, not too many people know that, because I don't really play much anymore. But I did study it for a couple years in college back in the day. But anyway, it's nice to see you. Nice to have you on the show.
Thank you. That is crazy that I'm the first one. I guess it's normal. Takes a while for us to get out there.
Yeah, well, and I guess, and this is where maybe we can start, and maybe you can like help me understand, because like I've always found that the contemporary music industry operates so far outside of maybe what the classical music industry functions as. Like, you have endowments, and there are grants, and there's like, there's unions that people are actually part of that actually do stuff for the musicians, which like in like, you know, in the new music business, or whatever we call it, in like the contemporary, the pop music industry, you know, the ones that you know, we're always talking about here, at least on this show, and in like, you know, Variety and Billboard and all of that, like, it's a very different industry. So, I mean, you've been a classical musician for a long time, your whole life, and a professional one now for a while. Maybe just break down just how the classical music industry works from your perspective and your vantage point, or maybe how you've worked in it.
Yeah.
You know, we'll get to all of the cool AI stuff that you're doing in a minute, but I'm really curious just in general, because I honestly have no idea how the classical music industry works. So yeah, help me understand.
Yeah, well, there's many ways. The most obvious one is a lot of people who graduate just end up teaching, so that's like
Okay.
their income.
Okay.
And that is maybe 95, maybe 90% of my friends are doing that. And then
Sure.
some of them who quit, found other jobs, or studied like in special, got a specialty in like law or something. And then there is this like performing career, but that actually is such a low percentage, I gotta say. Like, if it is for an orchestra, that's much more of a feasible job. So if you play like a string instrument or a brass instrument, or like whatever, like woodwinds, you can join an orchestra. You go to the auditions, and if you're good, then they will take you in, mostly as like a full-time or a part-time player. I
Mm,
don't really know too much about it because I'm a solo pianist,
right.
and all my life I had to actually be kind of like a startup. So it is
Mm,
very different than what other people have chosen. Despite having actually like a lot of experience in teaching, that's not what I was dreaming of doing when I was
sure.
studying piano. So
Yeah.
I thought that I would be happier on stage, first of all, because I love like playing and also traveling around the world for it. And
Yeah.
also I got into composing, so that's a whole other world too, where there's a lot of opportunities when you compose music for TV, movies, or advertisements. But that goes into more of like the skill set you have. So if you're
Sure.
really good with computers, then you can really produce music,
Mm,
and a lot of the music that you hear in TV shows or films. I mean, aside from really big budget ones, they're usually made on the computer, like with sample libraries.
right.
So, so you don't even need to know how to play the instrument. Essentially, you just need to know how to work the computer and the samples, and you don't even necessarily need to even write down the notes. So that
Sure.
is, I mean, there's a lot of aspects of what it means to be a musician these days.
Right.
Does
Right.
it
Right.
mean
Right.
you're good with computers? Does it mean you play an amazing violin? Like you know what I mean. So it is
Yep.
like, and there's
I know.
yeah.
No, no, you're absolutely right, and not to cut you off, is I just saw an artist. I just saw uh, Saint Vincent at the Greek Theater last weekend, and her first opener, who's incredibly talented artist, Maya Mansour, she didn't have an instrument on stage, like a real instrument for her opening set. It was just her and like some, she was doing some like live sampling, live looping, live stuff, but I want to say that might have been the first live performance, maybe that I've ever seen where there wasn't a physical instrument on
Hmm.
stage, other than maybe I guess DJs,
Hmm.
do that in like clubs and stuff like that. But at like a venue, a
Hmm.
concert
Hmm.
venue like that, it was just fascinating to me. But you're right. I mean, the
Yeah.
definition of like what a musician is these days has
Hmm.
dramatically changed these days. Now, have you done much scoring or composing for film and TV? Is that part of what you
So
do?
yeah, that is part of why I moved to LA actually. So
Mm-hmm.
I was doing a lot of shows, live concerts around the world before the pandemic, and then the
Okay.
pandemic hit, and all my concerts got canceled. So
Right.
I moved back with my parents. I was living in London at the time, and then
Okay.
I was going in and out of LA just to see whether I would want to live here. But pandemic happened. I got basically stuck in a way in Turkey, and
Mm.
half of that time I was in a forest chopping wood with like wild boars. I mean, it was kind of intense, but but
Wait, for real?
yeah,
This is
for real.
not like an analogy of something. You literally were
No,
chopping wood with wild boars. That's
yeah,
wild. Okay.
literally.
Damn.
Yeah, and
Hardcore.
yeah, it was kind of hardcore. And during that time, I was like, I still had my fan base online, which is something that I had done, and not a lot of musicians were working on. Like, that's another divide, I guess. Like with the academia, like the academic
Hmm.
circles don't really, or didn't at the time, care about social media or websites or anything. And you would hear like an amazing musician on stage, and they would have
Right.
like a really bad even website, like nothing
Right.
on it, or it was just poorly done, and like they didn't have social media accounts, and they don't really post content. And somehow, like, for me, it was really important to keep in touch with people around the world who support me and listen to me. I
Hmm.
really, really appreciate my followers and listeners and supporters.
Hmm.
So somehow I had already invested in that community, so that when the pandemic hit, I was like, okay, I still have access to communicating with them, right? So I
And this was
just
primarily over YouTube. Is that where
no,
your
Facebook
audience is?
actually.
Facebook. Okay.
Yeah,
Got
so
it.
at this point, I have over over 250,000 fans on Facebook,
Mm.
and that grew a lot in the pandemic. So I started doing live streams and like just
Mm.
free concerts for them every day. I did like 24 of them, and then I got burnt out after. But
Sure.
during
Yeah.
that time, I also created a piano course for beginners, just to
Cool.
learn the piano from scratch. But also, I was trying to make plans for what's going to happen next. Like,
Yep.
when everything is resolved, like where am I going to live? Like, what should my life look like? And I guess like in a way, I was really depressed, and I was thinking maybe the performances would never even come back. I don't know if you've ever lived through that kind of low state, but I actually didn't know
Yeah.
what on earth was happening. Like,
Yeah.
whether we
Yeah.
would get out of it, or like, like not knowing is a really, really tough thing to face.
Yep.
And I'm sure a
Yep.
lot of people went through the same phase.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, I can't just rely on stages like performances, because what if I don't have any other concerts? So and I had started composing sometime before that, although not for stage. Like, it wasn't really something I thought I could do, just
Mm-hmm.
because being classically trained, you can't really, like, you don't have the guts to even show anybody your own compositions, because the benchmark is so high that you're like, I don't even want to like try, because like
Right.
you're
Right.
playing like works of Beethoven, Bach, Mozart. I mean, like, how could you ever
Right.
even like, it's almost
Yep.
like an insult, like and so I was like, actually, like in college I would write pop songs secretly in my dorm room, like and I would never show those to anybody. um,
Right.
it was my guilty pleasure. And
Mm-hmm.
so after the pandemic, I moved to LA, and there were a few reasons. First of all, I could move, like, for visa. I mean, that was like possible for me, because I have a Turkish passport, and
You
it's
had an
been
O1
always like
visa, I
a.
got.
I have a green card, so
Oh,
yeah, it's like a long story,
okay.
but I didn't want to lose it, and also
Mm-hmm.
I always felt like US has like a lot of open minds, and really, it's like whatever you do, they say yes. Like, it's like a yes world, like, right? Like, this is where the dreams come true, and like all the
Yeah.
opportunities are. And it's interesting that I was trying to make it on, so I had so many followers already, but a lot of companies I would want to brand like partnership with, they would be like, where are you based? And as soon as they hear it's not the US, they wouldn't want to cooperate with me. They
Mm,
wouldn't want to send me stuff, or
interesting.
they wouldn't. It was interesting, yeah.
Mm,
And but as soon as I moved to LA, like, everybody was open to doing collaborations. Like, it just
mm-hmm.
was so much easier. I don't know. I mean, there was even a creator fund for TikTok, that you
Mm-hmm.
can't access from other countries. Like,
Oh.
everything, like all these companies, they innovate in the US
Mm,
first, and then
yeah.
maybe it reaches other countries. So I think that's also very interesting.
Yeah.
Um, just because not everywhere is equal, clearly, like in the world. So that's a sad
Sure.
truth, unfortunately. And so I was like, okay, well, I want to really do some like scoring for TV and film, and I don't know how to even get started with this, because it's so different than performing. Like, the
Right.
industry is totally different. Like, I have a brand and like a name for performances, but nobody cares about that in the like film music industry,
Right.
or like, they care about whether you're a good composer, and whether you can stick to the script, or
Right.
all that stuff. So and ironically, as soon as I moved to LA, I got an offer from a UK-based company that does like, that's the largest music production library. They
Mm,
do live recordings, like no samples ever used, really high quality recordings. It's called Audio Network, and so
okay.
they offered me to do to start two albums for them, for TV. And so one is orchestral, and so it's like piano and orchestra, like 22-piece string orchestra. And then the other one is like a solo piano. And they essentially are selling my music at this point to TV shows. So I get reports about where they have been featured. And recently I learned my music was on Love Island.
All
So
right.
yeah, so I get notified afterwards, but
Yep.
it's pretty
Yep.
awesome. So yeah, it's like, I think there's also obviously other ways. So like, you can work with directors, or like on like you've composed for specific movies.
Right.
I haven't
Right.
yet done that.
Okay.
I think I would only do that if I really care about the film and the director,
Hmm.
and I think it's like a meaningful, like artistic project. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean there are quite a few. Well, that lane where the composers kind of work, they're hired onto a TV show or a
Hmm.
film or something like that, and they are the composer
Hmm.
for the show, and they work with the director and the music supervisors and the editors, and it's kind of like for like let's say an hour worth of television,
Hmm.
maybe there's 32 minutes of scored music, and then
Yeah.
there's going to be like 17 minutes of like needle drop sync licensed music that the music supervisor does, and the
Hmm.
composer, like you said. Yeah, now I've sat in some of these rooms where a composer is kind of working. They usually have just like a keyboard there that's
Hmm.
like MIDI, and then they program everything. It's just them, and
Hmm.
maybe they'll bring in if they need like some acoustic instruments here and there, but mostly everything is pretty much like you said, programmed, and
Yeah.
samples and all of that. And then they're the screen is right up there, and the scene is there, and they're actually
Hmm.
playing directly to
Hmm.
if it's like a chase scene, they got to kind
Hmm.
of
Yeah.
work with the tempo of the scene, and kind of work that. So yeah, that is so is that something that like in that capacity where you're kind of hired on, is that something that interests you? Is that kind of what you were
No,
initially thinking about? No.
I
Okay.
mean, initially, yes, I was, and then I met with a lot of composers, and they were like, I mean, they gave me interesting feedback because their complaints were that they are basically abiding or like obeying rules of whatever they were told. So let's say they do a
Right.
chase scene, and then they come back and they're like, "Oh, we don't like it," or like rewrite it, or
Hmm.
make it slower,
Hmm.
make it faster. It's basically like someone else has the artistic upper hand, and you have
Mm,
to be
hmm.
secondary. So you don't really have that artistic freedom unless you have a very big brand, I think, and a name.
Sure.
And so I think, and also for copyright, like I actually write music for myself to play on stage. So if you
Yep.
think of like in terms of dreams and goals, like I would rather be like Ludovico Einaudi, but a virtuoso version of him, like where I play my own music on stage and I don't have
Uh-huh.
issues like with because like let's say like you write music for a film and and first of all you would need a lot of rights to then perform it live because you
Hmm.
can't just play like someone else's score like even if you've wrote it. I think there's some other rights around it where you need to have the performance rights to it. um and then
Okay.
um and then also let's say like I score like a Netflix documentary or like Netflix series or something, and I can't just start touring under
Mm,
that name, it is just not possible. And then also um well like there's this like branding part for me where like I want to really compose music that I like and not
hmm.
that's not something that was ordered for me to write.
Yeah. No, that
So
makes sense. Yeah.
yeah, but I would love to do it if it's something I care about, as I said. So if I
Sure.
like the director, if I like the topic, and if it's piano based, because I really care about piano, obviously, as being
Hmm.
a concert pianist, and I just would love to work on something. I mean, actually, I'll tell you, like one of my favorite documentaries is called The Mountain, and the
Okay.
soundtrack is amazing to that. Literally, it's like it's like this like beautiful cinematography, and this is like a documentary, not like the movie, but so there's two,
Hmm.
I think, or even three in the same name, but but this one
Okay.
it like opens up with like Australian chamber orchestra tuning, and then like the narration starts, and then there's amazing cinematography, and then like the music is a really important part of the script. And you even see it on the screen too.
Mm,
So you see the musicians, and you like it's a very direct communication between
yeah.
the audience. So I would love to do
Cool.
that, obviously. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, well, yeah, sure, and that sounds great. So let's talk about. I mean, I know with your original compositions and how you love performing. I saw that you performed a couple of them at the Walt Disney Music Hall
Yeah.
last year. How did you do that? How did that come to be?
So it's basically a lot of these things are not really planned. I mean, whatever has
Okay.
happened in my life, it's really like something that comes out of some opportunity, and I say yes. And that's the frustrating part, is like I don't have
Hmm.
control over my future. I feel like often,
Yeah.
because like right when I feel like, oh my god, like, what am I going to do for the next 2 months? Something comes out from somewhere, but it's like something you could
Ain't
never
that the life
imagine.
of a musician, right?
Yeah,
It's
and I
just
think
like,
like just like being on that roller coaster was
yeah,
definitely a choice I made, but then I wasn't always happy. I mean, I had a lot of challenges and lots of ups and
sure.
downs, and there was always a plan B for me, which I never did yet. Yet,
Hmm.
it's like we'll see. So I, as I said, I worked with Audio Network, so we recorded for the first time ever. My compositions were recorded with an orchestra, and that was like a huge opportunity for me.
Cool.
And when I then I had the scores. Obviously, you can't just like, you also have to be ready all the time. So like that is one advice I would give like any musician, is like you have to have your ducks in a row, so that
Hmm.
when the opportunity comes, you can actually say yes. Otherwise, you can't really, like, because these
Sure.
things happen so fast.
Yeah.
So for the Disney Hall one, it was like maybe a couple weeks before. I mean,
Whoa.
crazy like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, they had invited me to perform as a solo, like a solo pianist, to
Hmm.
do a few repertoire with this orchestra called LACMA. And it
Like
was
the museum,
essentially
LACMA?
no, it's like I think it's like Los Angeles American and Korean
Oh,
philharmonic
okay. Got it. Okay.
philharmonic orchestra. So it
Cool.
is like so yeah, it's basically like a lot of Americans and Koreans in the orchestra from various other orchestras. So they
Cool.
get together every year and do this like a large, super big concert. And for I was asked to play as part of that, and as I because I had this own, like, the repertoire that I had composed, I was able to then tell the conductor, hey, like, would you be okay if we played two of my pieces as well? So
Mm.
because it was part of a bigger concert, so there was like
Hmm.
opera singers in the end. There was like Verdi Requiem, really like, amazing
Cool.
piece of music. And there were some tributes, like Korean songs, and it was like also it was like a friendship concert between Turkey and Korea, because like we have like some really great stories from the time where I think Turkey sent troops to support the
Oh.
Koreans, and so they even raised a Korean orphan. They built like a school there, all the
Mm.
like the Turkish soldiers, and for orphaned kids, and then one of them grew up in Turkey, and there's a whole
Mm.
movie about it too. But so
Cool.
I think there was this like friendship, and uh, and when so I was able to then show show the conductor whether he would want to have two of my pieces aside from the rest of the repertoire, and he was like, yeah, sure. And then he's like a really hardcore conductor, very, very classical, and so like these compositions are for TV that I wrote, and they're not as classical as you would expect. Like it's
Sure.
kind of more for like soundtracks, right? And it's a
Okay.
little bit more like they had to be like 3 to 4 minutes each, because that was the
Hmm.
length of the compositions I had to do for the album. So I was a little afraid of being looked down on. And then until the end of the concert, I actually had no idea whether he liked my pieces or not. And then afterwards, he's like, my wife really likes your compositions. I'm like, okay. It was like like the classical people are really hardcore. I
Sure.
literally grew up with this. Like it's almost I don't want to say like, but some professors are like dictators in a way. Like I had a professor who was amazing,
Hmm.
like someone we all admired, but he was so hardcore. I remember he would like go on stage, like put his hand on your neck, literally like shake you,
Oh my
and then
God.
like in front of everybody else, and then you're like, what do you think the composer meant? Or like
It's like
just,
Whiplash. Yeah.
oh,
The
totally. So, I
movie.
mean, Whiplash, I think,
Right.
was supposed to be for classical, and they accidentally made it jazz. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
totally. Like, literally in
Hardcore.
my life. Yeah.
Hmm.
So I'm very used to like adapting to all these, because there's so much respect that we have to these professors. They're like really
Sure.
like almost like prophets in a way, like for us. Like we really
Hmm.
look at them, and they
Mm.
somehow make the music sing to you. And it's like
Mm.
in such magical ways that it's really enlightening.
Hmm.
I'm like, yeah, so
For
so I
the
was very
for
scared. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, it's great to hear that it went well and they enjoyed it. Now, did you score The like all the parts for the full orchestra, like all the violin parts, all the
Yeah. Yeah.
every part you scored out.
So it's interesting. So the way that, so I'm a very classical person. I would rather write down the scores first, but
Yeah,
the way that these production libraries want is reversed. They actually want to hear it first.
sure,
They don't want like notes on the paper. So
right.
what I did was to put them on the computer, like play them over it, like
Yeah.
like what you were just exactly like saying. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm not really good with these production tools. So
Okay.
I like so I sent them basically what it would sound like, but then then how can I say, like, I knew because we're not going to use those specific sounds, and because it's going to be recorded live, I didn't want to spend too much time on actually like doing the mock-ups. Like,
Oh, sure.
so there is
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
the mock-ups, right? So like
Yep.
you write, I mean, for your listeners, I guess, like there's a process, like many different steps. So first you, I don't know, like you play or record something, and then you put layers, and you orchestrate like different layers of orchestra and like strings and
Mm-hmm.
whatever is that you want in there. And then you use you use like sample libraries, like various sounds of other orchestras potentially. But if you don't have access to a real orchestra afterwards, then you
Mm-hmm.
make sure these mock-ups are amazing, that they just use those mock-ups in the end as if that's the real recording. But that takes a long time to produce. Um,
Right. So, and just
so
so I understand as you're doing this, so you're scoring the piece
mhm.
in a scoring program like a
Logic.
Sibelius or
Yeah,
Finale or something like that, right? Or
so normally
not
that's
notes
what
on the
I would do.
page.
Yes. So what I do is I write the piano first, and then I also
Okay.
write the score of the piano first. So both, I record the piano, or I do it at the same time where I'm like composing it and then writing down the notes, and then either I record it first, or I do. So that happens at the same time for me. So I work on the composition with the score of the piano and the recording of the MIDI of the piano,
Okay.
and then I
Okay.
tweak things around between the two. And then when the
Mm-hmm.
piano is final,
Yeah.
or during that time, if I have
Yeah.
ideas, then I start adding layers of other instruments on top. So I added the strings, and
And
yeah,
And when you add the strings, are you just playing them how you
yes,
hear them, how you want them, or are you
yes.
actually going into the notation program and putting in the notes one by one, or playing them in the notation program with a MIDI keyboard one by one and adjusting them so they're actually like playable by
Yeah,
a
so
real
no,
player?
so because they wanted to hear it first, I kind
Yeah.
of drafted a basic thing on the computer. So that was like, I was playing in and recording the parts of the strings on top of
Okay.
the piano
So there were
first.
no notes necessarily being
No,
generated for this. You were just creating the
no,
sounds.
it
Got
was
it.
just the
Okay.
piano score that I had initially. That
Okay.
was
Okay.
totally right, like totally
Sure.
done. And then, because then I have to learn how to play it, because I was recording and playing all the piano parts with it. So
Right.
it's
Right.
it's most all actually not most all of my music is piano origin. So everything I first
Mm-hmm.
hear for piano, and then I add, because I still want to be like the center of, like, the piano has to be the center of
Sure.
attention, and the rest
Mm-hmm.
of the instruments don't really even matter that much in a way.
They're
Um, it,
supporting. Yeah,
they're
it's like a
supporting.
concerto
Yes,
or
they do
something
matter,
like that.
obviously,
Yeah.
but not in a way. I mean, you could change the parts and arrange it, and still, like, the piece would still sound
Right.
like the same piece. So, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and I would love to talk about that too. Is like, what composing actually means. Like, is it, because I go more towards the classic way of composing, where you have the notes and the
Mm-hmm.
melody and the harmony already set. That for me is composing.
Yes.
A lot of, and I think production is when you're adding, and like various sounds, like let's say sound effects, or like you're but like, for me that is not composing in a way. Like, if you're
Mm.
creating sounds,
Yeah.
I don't
That's
consider that.
producing. I mean,
Yeah.
it's similar to like pop songwriting and production. And when you make like when you songwrite, that's the composition. It can be.
Mhm.
It's like when you play it on acoustic guitar and you sing
Yeah.
the lyrics and the melody. That's the song.
Mhm.
Whether it's then produced out into a full production that goes on a record produced by Jack Antonoff or whatever, that
Yeah.
like has all these sparkly things all over the place. It doesn't matter because the composition is the composition. The song is the song,
Yes.
and at its core, it's words and melodies, but I guess for your purposes, at its core, it's
Hmm.
still going to be the same composition, whether it's
Yes.
played on the piano, whether it's
Yes.
played on a harpsichord, whether it's played on a guitar, or whatever it is. It's that
Yes.
it's the melody, it's the
Mhm.
harmonies, all of
Yes,
that.
exactly. But I mean, I guess my point was that there are so many other genres where they do think that's just composing if it's like just some random sounds of like sound effects that are attached together. So I just
Yeah.
like I'm a little bit old school. So
Well,
yeah.
no, I mean it's a good point because there are producers out there, especially in hip hop and in pop, where they will say, if I create a production
Mm-hmm.
to this,
Hmm.
then I want 50% of the publishing of the
Right.
composition because
Mhm.
this wouldn't be what it is without that. And so
Right.
that is a debate, I guess, in the pop
Yes, it
world.
totally is.
But in classical it makes sense. But I think you're right. At its core, what is a composition? And I think it's like it's melodies, it's the chord changes in that order and how the
Hmm.
melody interacts with the counterpoint and harmonies and all of that. But
Exactly. Yeah.
okay,
So after that, I actually sent the rough mixes, like mock-ups, I guess, to the
yeah.
company, and then once they approved it, there was a copywriter and an orchestrator that helped me from the team to
Oh,
then
okay,
and then
nice,
write the parts for the string instruments, because
gotcha.
I had to then fly. I literally finished these like a day before my flight to
Whoa.
London. Yeah,
That's
it was kind of intense because like I'm doing so much at the same time. A lot of like composers don't actually perform, and
okay.
for me I was literally like, and I want to maybe like max this like the next couple of years. I want to have like 10 times more recordings and like really like
Hmm.
max it out, and I need to delegate some of those things that I don't have time to do. So they were
Sure.
really really great in helping me out with actually then putting all the notes down to paper so that the orchestra could record them.
Hmm.
And then when I was there, I kind of fixed what needs to be done at the in the recordings, and then I was like playing, obviously, as well.
Right.
And
Right.
then there was like a whole orchestra with a conductor, and they were super nice,
Hmm.
and it was like a really VIP experience, I gotta say.
Cool.
I had
Cool.
like assistants. I had like 9 people
Nice.
like
Wow.
checking on the work. It was amazing. Yeah. They
That's
even
great.
taped my scores. It's like,
All right.
which never happens. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Well, yeah, you get to the Walt Disney Music Hall, and right there, it's that's nice, a level of standard. Cool. So, I want to talk about kind of now what you've been doing in the AI
Mhm.
realm and the sphere. It's fascinating. You have this classical regenerated project where you're reimagining um, Chopin and
Mhm.
Vivaldi and Mozart and Bach and these legends of classical music that so tell me about this project that you're doing and how this all works.
Yeah, so this is kind of an interesting thing. Like don't know, like I don't really believe in callings in a way, but then I do have strong opinions on certain things, and
Hmm.
and somehow for a long, I mean, since I ever since I was born, I always wanted to kind of spread the music, like the classical legends. And communicate. I guess like let's go back to my childhood. Like I grew up in a place where like I was the only musician essentially. Like I
Hmm.
didn't have any friends who were musicians,
Mm,
and I didn't have anybody to relate to or communicate with. They were all listening to like rock music, and I thought that that was the fault of the classical performers because it was such a like they just performed in such boring ways. I have to say, like I would fall asleep when I was a kid, like going to these concerts because
mm,
you would see like the orchestra members really hating their job, like they're
mm,
just like as if 9 to 5 workers, like it's just there was no passion, and
mm.
also the performers wouldn't even say a word to the audience, and they would just bow, play, and leave, and there was no communication, and I just really was like, why does
Yeah.
it have to be that way? And then when I started reading about all these back in the time, that was not at all the case. I mean, these composers were like rock stars, like Mozart Beethoven,
Hmm.
Franz Liszt especially, like he literally was one of the first rock stars in music history. So I was like trying to change that somehow. And so for a while, it's so crazy that a friend of mine had gifted me the bust of Beethoven, and I had opened an account on Instagram for him, but like written as B-A-E Tofen, like Bay, like
Okay, right,
like
yeah.
and then I
Cute.
would take him everywhere, and then I would imagine as if he's like alive, basically, and I
Uh-huh.
would take his photos. So like I would create like fictional, but like based on facts, like historic facts, like fictional comments about him. Like I would create stories around him. Like
Okay.
as if he just came
It's
back.
fan fiction. It's like
Yeah.
it's fan fiction for Beethoven. That's great. Maybe you're the first Beethoven fan fiction that's ever existed. Cute. Okay.
I
Love
was a
it.
nerd, honestly.
Yeah.
And so, I would take him around in like Hollywood or like on the airplanes, and we go to exhibitions, and he would make
It's
comments
like that
about
scene in
something.
Amelie where they take the gnome everywhere that they travel and stuff. Yeah, that's cute. Okay,
And
nice.
so it was always in me to make it accessible, like make classical music accessible somehow, because I felt like people
Hmm.
didn't give it a chance, and I always had hard time relating to my age group, and they would never want to even go to concerts. Like their
Yeah.
their parents or their grandparents would force them, because I started playing when I was like 9,
Yeah.
and so I just remember like how they thought classical music was boring, or it was like for sleep or so. It was just so wrong. I mean, you can find like much more hardcore music in classical than like Metallica or
Hmm.
Nirvana. Like if
Sure.
you listen to some Prokofiev or Shostakovich or even
Yep.
Zenekas. And so I think I was trying to kind of educate people in a way that is entertaining, but also like something that is very deep in my heart. Um, and when this AI thing happened, it was super random. I actually wasn't planning on it, but I ended up going to a bunch of networking events for AI, because I'm really just fascinated by AI and I wanted to learn. And I was the only musician in the room, and everybody was introducing themselves, and they're like, oh, like I had like 15 startups, and like I'm an engineer, I'm like a VFX artist, like just like a lot of different really successful people. And then
Yeah.
and it came to me, I'm like, I'm a classical concert pianist and composer, and I have no idea what I'm doing here. And
Hmm.
they just like laughed. And like there was the CEO of an AI conference called CogX. He was
Hmm.
there, and he was like, do you want to play something? And I was like, well, like, do you have a piano? Like, and then he's like, well, not here, but we could arrange something. And so, and I told them like I was interested in compositional tools, and maybe even stage tools for music with AI, and exploring them. And he
Hmm.
said, well, like, okay, just then in 2 weeks, like play something that is with
Hmm.
AI. And I said yes, without actually even having anything in my
Oh
hands.
gosh. Yeah,
So
there
I
you go.
went home, and I
Nothing
did
like a
like
deadline to kick your ass into gear,
yeah,
right?
pretty pretty
Right.
much. And I was
Yeah,
like, I
sure.
deep dove into like whatever was available with AI and music and piano, and like I found a lot of different projects people developed, but there were like nothing that you could use on stage professionally. Like
Hmm.
it was maybe, for example, that I found reactive piano, where like you play a few keys, but then it's more for like non-pianists. So like
Yep.
you press a few things, and then it responds back in a really much more beautiful way. But it
Okay.
like so what would you even do? Like, because I already know how to play, right? It's like I don't need
Right.
like it to like make my music better. I want it to be like collaborating with me in a
Yep.
way. And so I started experimenting with music generation tools, AI music generation tools. For example, Udio and Suno. And Udio
Hmm.
was very effective. So I ended up generating maybe 50 different excerpts of music. And then I realized, oh my God, like there was one that was totally like Chopin. And like, this was not even related to the prompt at all. Like it was basically like reverse engineering. So
Huh.
I studied piano performance and literature, keyboard literature in college. So this
Okay.
was basically like part of my degree was to learn all the important pieces of music written for the keyboard instrument ever. So
Okay.
from like Gregorian chants all the way up to contemporary
Sure.
classical. So we would be asked to to basically how can I say, like, to tell the name of the composer, fill in the blank notes, and like,
Hmm.
and tell them basically what a piece of music was and what
Yeah.
part of the piece it was in, and which century or which year was composed and which country was
Nice.
composed, and all those details basically by like either listening or having some sort of excerpt, written excerpt.
Sure. Sure.
And then somehow, like, I thought I would never use that skill, but here I was like, oh my god, like I can
Yeah.
hear the data that was trained,
Wow. Yeah.
how
Yeah.
these AI outputs were trained.
So
And
before I
yeah.
wait, I just want to stop you for a second because for someone who's never used an AI music generation
Uh-huh.
tool before, like an Udio or a
Mhm.
Suno,
Mhm.
how does this work? When you say, like, specifically, you're like, I generated 50
Mhm.
pieces of music. Like,
Yeah.
step me through the process of what it means to generate a piece of music, and how specifically how are you doing this?
So there really is, honestly, like, this was when it was very new. So now they have more
Okay.
tools that are more specific because you can then have a little more control over what you generate. So they're
Okay.
trying to build like intros and outros and middle section. So that at the
Yeah.
time they didn't have those. So I was trying to prompt engineer it. So basically, like, writing prompts about what instruments I want and whether there should be lyrics or no lyrics. And then I was just generating lots of piano music, but most of
Mm.
them didn't make any sense. It's like
Okay.
it's not like the visuals. I think the image generation tools were much better. I would say much
Okay.
easier. But this one, like, you just have like random notes and they don't really
Mm.
make sense, or it
Mm.
would be like super simple, like elevator music. Like, you don't want to
Okay.
use that. So for me, it was literally like me figuring out which ones made sense. So the prompting, as I said, was so not even relevant. It was like so generic, like piano music, like
Okay.
just like romantic piano,
Yeah.
classical, just like just stuff like, I mean, those, like, I still actually don't really do the prompting. There isn't
Okay.
really that you don't really have that much control at this point about like the melodies and the harmonies. You do have an option to upload now a piece of melody and then it creates the rest of it for you.
Oh,
But
wow. Okay.
but I'm not really interested in that either.
Hmm.
I'm really interested in like, how does AI, like, how can I use a meaningful music, a seed, let's say, from an AI generated piece of music, and then develop that into a meaningful long composition that I can play
Hmm.
on stage. So
Okay.
and funny enough, like, I created this Chopin preludes, which is, I think, still fascinating. And then once I tried to do it again, I couldn't. It's almost,
What do you mean you
it's such a,
created a Chopin prelude? What does that mean
yeah.
that you created a Chopin
So
prelude?
amongst all the excerpts that I created, I heard
Yeah.
Chopin in them, and I was like, this is so much like Chopin
Yeah.
alive. Like, I can hear his music, and I could see, like,
Mm.
in certain parts I could hear his own melodies, but in a way where it's like reworked. So almost like
Oh.
it's as if he came alive. It was kind of a weird experience,
Huh.
gotta say, kind of creepy. Um,
Huh.
so I was like, okay, what, like, could I then, like, is this how he would compose if he was still alive? And like, the
Mm.
question came to my mind, and I was like, oh my god, that would be amazing to bring him back with AI.
Hmm.
And why don't I try? So I created, like, so I extended it, and some of the parts I kind of made it more practically possible for the piano to play, because there were some, like, so it has like three parts, the AI prelude. It's on YouTube if you want to
Yeah.
listen to it. But it starts with this like melody, and it's like it's a singing melody, which is very typical of Chopin, with an accompaniment in the left hand. It's
Is this the Chopin Regenerated, the AI prelude
Yes.
that's on your YouTube?
Yeah.
Why don't we take a listen to it so then we can
Okay.
talk about it, because it is fascinating. I did watch it. So let's listen to this one, and then we'll talk about it, just so people have a good understanding of it. Beautiful. So for the people that are not watching this on YouTube and just listening to this, AyseDeniz just performed this piece. You just played this piece, and I watched you play it, and so so now that was you actually playing the piano, right? We're not witnessing an AI generated version of you that
Yeah,
did
no, I'm
something like,
real.
okay, that's you actually playing it. So that was an
Yeah.
incredible performance. So tell me about, and the video is very well done, but so yes, step me through how that was created, what this piece
Yeah,
is, and all
so
of that.
the piece is a very, very typical style of Chopin's work, like, and it is clearly trained on Chopin. So it's all AI
Okay.
composed. I didn't want to really intervene with it, and I didn't want to like
Mm.
change anything. So it's literally the first ever totally AI composed piece of piano music that is in the style of Chopin.
And was
And
the prompt of that like saying compose a 2 minute piece,
no,
Chopin piano?
no,
No, you.
nothing at all. It was literally just like me going around, like, just like, as I said, like, just generating lots of like romantic piano music. And
Mm,
then I spotted this one that was
okay.
it was like the first 30 seconds basically that I had. I was like, wow, this is a brilliant melody. And this is exactly like how Chopin would write. The
Yep.
only difference is like the ratio of the melody is a little longer than normal. But that's totally fine. I mean, I was also like, I'm very curious about what the AI it would do, and also because it's like an emotional piece of music. This was really
Mm-hmm.
fascinating for me to see that it could create something so emotional and
Sure.
romantic.
Yeah.
Because until that, I mean, this was like in April that I was working on this, like end of April,
Wow.
so early still. And
Yeah.
that I mean, I guess like even now people aren't really assuming that AI could create emotional music, but it totally does. Like it's kind of
That's
we thought
wild.
that being emotional was only for humans, um, but because it is trained on human performances that are emotional, then it is
Right.
able to then have a brilliant output. And So what I did was to extend it, and so the extension would be like, let's say I would generate the second part of this music, like the next 30 seconds, let's say, but
Mm.
then let's say 50 more of that, like, and then I would choose the one that makes most sense.
Okay.
So
Okay.
it's like you keep generating until you find a meaningful thing that complements it.
Right.
And it's interesting because like now I work a little differently. I actually am working on like a Mozart piece for the piano and orchestra, and I actually import different generations and then I edit them in Logic. So I create various parts, and they don't necessarily have to be done only through the AI. I mean, I co-write and all that stuff too, but for this specific piece, it was literally like all done in the system on
Mm.
UDO, just me trying and trying again and again. It takes actually a lot of time to really decide what should go next, and
Mm-hmm.
how can you take like it. I had no special prompts for this, like for
Okay.
anything really.
Yeah.
It is really more about finding the right meaningful melody that makes sense and that
Mm-hmm.
will have a performance level with it where I could do it. It's almost like a feedback loop, right? Like it's somehow I end up finding things that I would even like I would love to play somehow.
Yeah.
It's like it's a really interesting process. And
Mm.
if I want to imitate it again, it doesn't happen. So
Right.
I
So
can't
so
really do that again.
it's
Yeah.
kicking out just an audio file of a
Hmm.
solo piano,
Hmm.
and then but it kicks out a bunch of, or you kicks out one, you're like, nah, not that, you refresh it, it kicks out another, you refresh it, it kicks out another, you're
Yeah.
like, that's it, and you're like, do the next 30
Yeah.
seconds, do that. You get a 2 minute piece of music.
Hmm.
Then do you like download this
Hmm.
MP3, and then
Yeah.
are you transcribing this by
Yeah.
ear, or like how
Yeah. Pretty much.
you are,
Yeah.
so you can learn how to
Yes.
play it? Wow. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So that part, I think there hopefully there's going to be a tool for that because
Sure.
that's just like admin work, It's like just like
Right.
transcribing something from ear, like it's unnecessary waste of time. I don't want to say
Right.
waste of. It kind of is. I would rather
Totally. Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah,
like
yeah,
learn how to
yeah.
play it and like actually like start working on it directly. So I'm
Yeah.
now actually I'm having a bigger team now to handle because I'm doing like ten times more of the repertoire now, working on all the composers like Rachmaninoff, Schumann, Bach,
Yeah.
Beethoven. And I'm also composing my other albums. So I found some great people to work on this project with me too, and a visual team too. So it's like very
Mm,
exciting. But essentially, yeah, you have to like write all the notes down by ear,
mm.
and then learn how to play it, and then memorize it
And
if
is it
you want
kicking
to.
out music? I mean, clearly you
Yeah.
as a human were able to play this. Where there's certain were there certain pieces of music it was kicking out that you're like, there's no way a human
Yeah.
could actually play that.
Yeah. So if you
Okay.
if you heard like the middle section, it gets really fiery, like really
Yeah.
difficult to play. And
Yeah.
right towards the end of that, it actually that was kind of impossible to even notate because it didn't make sense. It was just like, because it's like recreating sounds. It's not actually playing the instrument.
Right.
So the sounds didn't really make sense. It was a bunch
Okay.
of sounds that were over each other and it's just like mumbling, right? So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
had to
Yeah.
then create something that was alongside of that message. It's almost like,
Gotcha.
you know how, I don't know if you had like musician friends who would imitate other musicians or composers. So they would pretend like, let's say you have a pianist friend and he's pretending to play Rachmaninoff. So there's a
Hmm.
lot of ways you could do that. And you could say that is Rachmaninoff for sure, but
Yeah.
it's not, but then he would be playing like half the notes wrong, or it would even be like a
Right.
non-existent
Right.
piece.
Right.
So it's almost like that with AI, where I'm like, oh, I know what you mean, and then I'm like, okay, this is what it meant. It's
Yep.
almost like I'm like the postman in a
How
way
I
to
play Rachmaninoff is I just start banging on the piano
exactly.
with my full palms, and I'm like, that's my
That's
Rachmaninoff.
it.
That's all I can do.
Yeah, and
Right,
then if
right,
you
all
came
right.
to me with that, and I could
Yeah,
actually write the
you're like,
notes
I
for
know what
that.
you're trying to do there. I
Yeah,
get it. Right, right. Okay,
yeah, and then I would
okay.
create something for you that sounds like Rachmaninoff with the right
Right.
notes, but with the
Yeah.
same gestures. So
Sure.
it's really interesting. It's like a very new
Okay.
process,
Yep.
and that is
Mm,
basically how I worked on it. And I really wanted to give credit to these amazing composers, because
yeah.
it's not like I really don't want someone to suddenly be like, oh yeah, I composed this piece of music and it's mine, and it's like it's
Right.
not even like I don't want
Mm,
AI to be this like tool for non-musicians to suddenly declare they're like making music. Like,
yeah.
I'm still
Yeah.
like, yeah, I care about the rights, the ethical rights, and obviously, like with classical, you don't really have copyright issues.
Mm-hmm.
But I
Mm-hmm.
still care about crediting the original composers
Right.
that pieces
Yeah.
were trained.
So let's talk about that. You bring up the ethical component of this. This is the biggest debate in the music industry right now.
Hmm.
The ethics. Both Udio and Suno that you referenced, that you used, are being sued by
Yeah,
the music industry
yeah.
because they did
Hmm.
not get licenses
Hmm.
to train their models based on some of the music. Now, of course, with
Hmm.
classical music, the statute of limitations is long expired in terms of copyright. I should say the copyrights have long expired, and so that is in the public domain, so they can
Yeah.
train it on that. That's clear cut. But when it comes to how it's trained, for pop music and all that,
Mm.
in the court cases, I mean, how
Yeah.
you recognize Chopin and
Mm.
Mozart or Bach,
Hmm.
the lay ear can
Hmm.
also recognize
Yeah.
that it was trained on a Michael Jackson song, or that it
Right.
was trained on, and it's so
Hmm. Hmm.
obvious,
Hmm.
and you can, like, you hear it,
Hmm.
and even you don't even have to say, like, do a Michael Jackson song. It just like kicks it out, and you're like, oh
Hmm.
my gosh, that sounds just like a Michael Jackson song.
Hmm.
Anyone would be able to tell. And so there's the ethics around that, and the the law isn't settled, and people, the ethics aren't even settled. People don't really
Yeah.
realize. So
Hmm.
I'm curious, like, where you're drawing the line, as in, you say
Hmm.
you want to credit the
Hmm.
original composers. Only
Yeah.
you, I shouldn't say only you, but like, you recognize and acknowledge that, like, oh, this sounds like Chopin because you
Yeah.
studied this, and because of your
Yeah.
background, and because you did those crazy quizzes in college where it's like a Mad Libs, but of like the composers, and, like, but you knew it, and like, so most people wouldn't know that. And Udio and Suni in these programs aren't saying this is in the style of Chopin,
Hmm. Hmm.
because God forbid that then opens them up to litigation, because you
Hmm.
can't say this is in the style of Michael Jackson. I don't know if you've used
Right.
that, or the
Right.
Beatles or whatever.
Yeah.
And then, like, Paul McCartney's going to come after them and start,
Yeah.
and sue them. But it's like, so you recognize this is in the style of Chopin or Bach or Mozart
Hmm.
because you know them so intimately.
Hmm.
But do you think that these programs should be citing the references, and should be citing exactly where they're pulling and how they trained the model and what they're kicking out to you?
It's really interesting because I honestly, this might sound interesting, but like, when you're doing a Google search, like I feel like it's not the job of these companies to necessarily take care of the licenses, but the ones who are using it commercially, or like, or the ones who are generating the music in a way. I feel like
Not even to
there's
train
more.
the model? You think that
Well,
they should just be able to
I don't,
train the
I
model
think the
on
train,
all
yeah,
piece
I
of
think
all
that's for
music?
public good. Honestly, that's
Hmm.
information, and we're all trained in public data. You can listen to Beatles album and then that you can be inspired and write a song. It's the same. I think there isn't really that much. My issue is using those specific sounds that belong to them. And so if you're not re-recording it and recomposing, and if you're using their voices, for example,
Hmm.
if you're using, and if it's under copyright, I think that is an issue. But for, I guess like that, and that's why I don't even play around with that kind of commercial pop songs or anything. Like I don't want to get
Right.
into that world because that needs to be sorted out. But I feel like it's more the responsibility of the person, because you could plagiarize if you wanted to anyway, right? You can just like take, like, so it is on you, as an artist, and as an independent artist, for example. I have to worry
Hmm.
about my own rights. Like I have to worry about what music I'm releasing and how to get the rights for those. So if
Yeah.
I'm using, yeah, so I don't know, like how eventually, like how this could be even labeled. Like I don't know. I think we're in such a gray area that preventing technology to not achieve its highest forms of creation is, I think, not a great way to go about it. But I think I think there are some licensing agreements that they've been making. I didn't really follow it too much just because it's not my territory, but I think they
Yeah.
are going to come to some sort of agreement with,
Well,
in the
regardless
future.
of like, yeah, regardless of what the license and what the labels and the
Hmm.
publishers and the tech companies, whatever
Yeah.
their agreements come to, it's all. I mean, in the end, that's all about money.
Hmm.
I'm more so like around the ethics of this
Hmm.
and just like
Yeah.
curious, like how you feel so strongly
Hmm.
that you should be citing Chopin and you should be
Hmm.
citing these.
Yeah.
Most people that are going to use these programs
Hmm.
aren't going to recognize these references, whether it's classical
Yeah.
and some even pop or rock or whatever. And so, like you say,
Right.
maybe it's on the responsibility of the user, or if you want
Hmm.
to release this
Hmm.
commercially or something like that.
Yeah.
What if they just have no idea? What if they're like,
Yeah.
give me a rock song with these words,
Right.
and it's like, oh wow, that is identical to Sergeant
Hmm.
Pepper's,
Right.
Lonely Hearts Club Band by the Beatles,
Right.
but they don't recognize it because they're 16 and they're like, I've never heard of the Beatles, I've never heard the
Right.
Beatles, and they're
Right.
like,
Of course.
oh, and it like,
Mm.
it's so clear to someone who
Mhm.
knows that song that's like, oh, this is a direct ripoff of Sergeant Pepper's, but the commercially released person wouldn't know that. Why is it their responsibility to do
Yeah.
that, even though they're not the ones that are,
Yeah.
because it's different if I'm writing a piece of music and I so clearly rip off Sergeant
Mm.
Pepper's, it's because I know the song. It's because like
Right.
subconsciously I'm like it's in there. It's like, oh whoops, like yep, I'm gonna have to split the publishing, with McCartney and Lennon now because like, oh yeah, I clearly did that. It worked this way in there
Yeah.
subconsciously, no
Mhm.
problem.
Mhm.
But now when you're talking about
Mhm.
new users that have literally
Yeah.
maybe never heard the Beatles
Yeah.
before, which is crazy, but let's just say they've never heard the Beatles before, they're 14
Mhm.
years old and they're using this program, but
Mhm.
clearly Udio and Suno have ingested the Beatles, or
Mhm.
clearly they've ingested whatever, and now this 14-year-old goes there, make me a rock song, make me a pop song, and it
Mhm.
kicks this out, and then they release it, and now they're the ones that should get sued.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, because I
The
mean, if you're
14-year-old should get
releasing,
sued.
yeah, totally. Because if you're releasing something, it's like if you're creating a food product, let's say, you're essentially you're the responsible for that food to reselling. Like if you add things that you don't know what's in it, like it's
Hmm.
your responsibility as a company. So I think from like a consumer culture kind of thing, like yeah, you're responsible for everything that you're releasing, and if you're
Okay.
earning money from it, I think you should actually be responsible to get the information and learn about it. But also, I think the like I think actually a lot of people, and this is something not a lot of people know, but like a lot of people don't even know how the AI comes up with a thing, like with the output. It's not like it can list you like specific things that were
Well,
used in there,
that's by
you know?
design. No,
Yeah,
but you're right. You're right.
yeah,
But that is the fault of these tech companies that
right.
didn't
Yes.
didn't
So
build it that way to be able to trace back to say this is 70% Chopin, 10% Bach, and 5%
right,
Mozart in this
right, right,
composition.
right. Right.
You
I don't
know?
think it works like that because you can't really it's literally recomposed. Like I cannot say like I wouldn't be able to tell you exactly which part of Chopin because it's really an original work of music. You know, it is in the
Hmm.
style of Chopin, but he didn't write it. It's a
So
totally
I'm curious,
new
like,
piece of music, you know?
I mean, you say it's in the style of Chopin, but
Yeah.
if that's just because, I mean, that's obviously your opinion and your
Hmm.
extremely educated opinion, but
Hmm.
like it clearly didn't just pull from Chopin to
Hmm.
create that
Yeah.
work, and it's clearly pulling from a
Hmm.
lot of classical
Hmm. Hmm.
composers to create that piece of music.
Right.
So like, I guess saying it's in the style of Chopin,
Mm.
is that actually even accurate? Because like it
Right.
is
So
kind of,
Chopin,
but it.
yeah, I mean, Chopin was also inspired by other composers. It's not like he was
Mhm.
born and just created music on his own with like an alien. Like he was really
Right.
inspired by John Field, for example, who was writing the first nocturnes ever. And
Mhm.
so,
Mhm.
you know, we all know this, and that's totally fine. So, like, why can't AI do the same, right? It's like because it is essentially so. As I said, I think my issue is if they are using those sounds. Like, if someone is generating music first of all, I think they should say it's composed by AI. Like there should be something to
Yes.
flag. So I think that like I don't think it would be truthful, but nobody's gonna do this. But
But
in
no
an
one would
ideal world,
know.
in an ideal world, like the musicians would be honest and authentic and say, "Hey, this is an AI composed piece of music."
Mhm.
And then if they were recording it with their own voices and with their own instruments, and so not using the sounds, I think that could be fine because then you wouldn't be stealing the sound of the Beatles, let's say, or Michael Jackson. You know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
I think
Mhm.
that could be a more ethical way to go about it. If they're inspired by like some of the but again, this is going to be so impossible to tell, so I don't even
Right.
know if it's like if there's even point in discussing it, you know,
Well,
but yeah.
yeah, I mean, I'm curious because like it's interesting to me to hear you say that you don't have a problem personally
Mhm.
with these AI music generation programs like Udio and Suno uh, training itself on all of these licensed or
Mhm.
unlicensed piece of
Mhm.
copyrighted
Mhm.
music because you use the comparison, which I've heard the companies use and the tech companies use.
Mhm.
Uh, a human could just listen to all this
Mhm.
music, and that's how we
Right.
train ourselves.
Right.
But we have to draw a line somewhere because like robots are not human, and like
Mhm.
these programs, these computer programs, there no human can possibly intake that much material
Mhm.
in our lifetime. It's impossible, and there's no way that we could generate this much material at this rapid of a rate. That
Mhm.
is just not a human capability.
Mhm.
And so uh, like I'm curious like why you think that essentially the AI programs or robots or tech
Mhm.
companies should have the
Mhm.
same rights as humans, even though they have far superior capabilities than
I
humans.
guess, you know, it's at the end, who is taking advantage of it? It's going to be humans, right? It's not like AI is earning money and doing its own thing. It's literally the people who are exploiting it.
Or the corporations that will be exploiting it, and the CEOs of these corporations that
Right,
will be pumping out all of this music, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands,
right.
millions of songs,
But
and then
yeah,
there's two people making a bunch of money that run these
right.
companies,
But they're
and
still
it's not.
human. It's still the human
I
fault, right?
mean,
You
yeah,
know, it's like, you know, so it's like, I think essentially
until
like
they're
we're
not.
discussing, yeah, until they're not,
just,
yeah, I mean, I do have
just
a theory
kidding.
about that too, with like
That's a
AI
whole other
enjoying their own
conversation for
music.
a different podcast.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
anyway,
But again, it's really falls onto humans making decisions. And yeah, I mean, I
yeah.
think there should be laws and definitely new ways of training. I don't think these tech companies should be punished for advancing technology, but there has to be new rules and laws and regulations. And for
Yeah.
example, like I think I forget who did this deal, but they did a deal where I think maybe with voiceover actors, where the people whose voices would be used in training could earn money from each time that their voice was used in AI. So I mean that's a great deal, right? Like I would
Hmm.
love to provide some of my piano tracks for an AI company, and I could have a passive income. I mean that'd be
Yeah.
great. So I think, and that's
And
literally
that is
exactly why.
happening. There are
Mhm.
there are music companies, and that to me is a more ethical way
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
license
Yeah.
music, where
Hmm.
when a model is training itself, when the model is training on pieces of music, the music that it is being trained on, those musicians or composers, songwriters
Hmm.
are being compensated for
Yes,
that. That
absolutely.
is
Yeah.
now phase two. So phase one,
Right.
where you say like they don't know, like Udio and Suno did it in
Mm,
my opinion in an
mm,
unethical way, where they're just like,
mm,
give me all the music, let me
mm,
train it just like a human could do this.
mm.
But phase two, there are now, in my opinion, and this is just my
Uh-huh.
opinion, and in more ethical ways where
Hmm.
they are compensating
Right.
composers, musicians, songwriters who are saying, okay, you can
Hmm.
train your model on my music, but just pay me a
Absolutely.
license fee
Yeah.
for the training,
Yeah,
which is,
but again, like because I see it more of a technological experiment. I don't
yep,
really I think we need to experiment and really like advance technology, and then like, and it's okay to make mistakes on the way, but then the most important
yeah,
to actually fix those things, right? So
okay,
I mean this does fall on also corporations, like you said, and CEOs, and like who's going to use this music? Are they going to fire a bunch of musicians and just hire like just AI generated music? Like, is that what's going to happen? Or like what's the future going to look like? And it has to
right,
be for humans, right? And that's the priority. And specifically when I feel like I am being very cautious with these things. Like I just have my own responsibility as a human being of how I portray a message and how I deliver a piece of music. And for example, like I face a lot of like kind of criticism for even trying to rewrite, not rewrite, but like create music in the style of these composers,
yep,
even though it's not a copyright issue. They were like, how dare you touch it? And like, I always feel like it is okay to try and advance, and then and then you get together and really decide on what's the right way to go ahead. And I think there's going to be many different music tools that are happening. There's so many startups working on this, and I mean,
hmm
I just
hmm
was listening to a session of three, four of them working on ethical music generation. One thing though is I do feel like, like when you see these companies being sued by the major labels, I mean, the
yeah,
major labels already are making millions of dollars. It's the
yeah,
independent up and coming artists that need to be cared for, I think.
yes,
And somehow it's always the big guys making these things, like
yes,
the fuss about it. So, and for me, for example, like the way that AI benefited my career was insanely amazing, that
yeah,
I just wouldn't want anything to hurt these companies in a way,
mm,
because they have provided me a new source of well, first of all, this new project that I'm working on, and in a way, like I am able to now generate new repertoire that was never written for the piano and actually play them on stage. So I
mm,
have like completely new compositions I could create in 2 days.
mm,
And that means I could do like if someone asks me to do a tribute concert for, I don't know, in the style of Beethoven, I could literally go on the computer, work on these like little like pieces of music, and then put together a whole show, like in a very short time, without worrying about I don't know, just like so. I guess my perspective is in the classical realm, all everything has already been composed, and everybody plays the same pieces. Like you
hmm
hear the
hmm
same Beethoven sonata, the
right,
same Beethoven like symphonies, or you play like same Chopin sonatas, the same Chopin preludes, and you're just like afterwards you're just like, okay, well, how many more times am I going to hear the same piece of music
yeah,
played by like 25 other pianists, right?
right, right,
Like,
right.
and
But would
and
you have a
so
problem if your counterpart, if someone
mm,
came out and said, this is my original composition, but it actually was
mm,
created the exact way that you're saying these are created,
yes,
and how would
yeah.
anybody know?
Yes. I would know. I mean, yes, it is. I
You
mean,
would know.
I
Or
would
well,
write
but
to
no,
them.
but how would you but literally, like, how would you know? Because you
Right.
said you refresh it every time. You can never recreate or regenerate the exact same
Yeah.
piece. So
Yeah.
it's not
True.
like it's a
True.
sample library or something like that. And like
Yeah.
who knows, it's just not a human that has been inspired by all of this. And
Right,
I'm
true. I
sure
mean, that's technically that's possible. I wouldn't want to sue them for it. I mean, I would just say,
right.
hey, like that is inspired by XYZ, and that's cool. Like, I mean, I guess
Hmm.
my problem is more about someone who doesn't know how to compose claiming that they compose. Like, I wouldn't want that to happen. That's more of an issue for me because, as a musician, I spent years like trying
Right.
to play the instrument and perfect it. And even like, and this isn't even about AI, it's about technology. And so when the MIDI like sample libraries came about, you can literally pretend like you can write a violin solo violin part and nobody's going to know whether you actually played the violin or not, right?
Right.
Like you
Yep.
don't even need to know how to play the other instruments. And I think
Yep.
that's a little cheating, honestly. Like you've never touched a violin in your life. And then here you are composing for violin. I think initially that was like a shock to me, just seeing
Yep.
all these people just on their computers writing for orchestra. I'm like, dudes, like you've never even like touched these instruments. And here we are like in the performance part of the academia where we're like working literally like 10 hours a day on the piano, like trying to work on new repertoire and playing it live. And most of
Hmm.
these film scores aren't even recorded live. Like I think that is my issue more is this whole like viewpoint of like how honest can people get? Like I think there was a letter that was viral for I don't want to like misname it, but I'm pretty sure it was for Game of Thrones, where like nothing was recorded live for the soundtrack
Hmm.
back in the time. And this cellist wrote a letter saying, you guys are like, this is the most famous, like, series, and you have so much money. Can't you just hire real musicians? Like,
Yeah.
so that is something that is more of an issue for me, just generally, like, how technology is coming in. But I had to make peace with that. I
Hmm.
had to make peace because that is also the fault of the industry, because movies don't really have the budget for live musicians. If I wanted to hire live musicians like an orchestra, it would cost me $20,000. Like I
Right.
don't have that money coming from Spotify. It's like,
Right.
the way that the streaming platforms are so exploiting artists is insane to me. Like
Hmm.
it's like, when iTunes was like first, when it arrived, you could sell a song, like a track,
Hmm.
for $1. Like it was like 99 cents, and you could
Hmm.
even make it like 79, I think, or maybe 1.3. You had like more control over each download people would make.
Sure.
And the streaming came and destroyed the entire thing. So I remember like I took off all my music from Spotify for a while, literally everything. I mean, but
Hmm.
nobody cares. Obviously, it's not like I'm Taylor Swift and somebody cares about
Hmm.
this,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So it made no difference. But at that time, I was just so angry because my music was streamed like a track 55,000 times, and all I got was $150.
No, I get, I get your point. But I guess a similar argument that you were kind of making about, how you feel streaming kind of diluted or cheapened, you know, or commoditized music. One could make that same argument, I guess I would say, as you know AI doing the same for composers,
Hmm.
as in like, you're saying that taking, and just like the cellist who made the argument to Game of Thrones, if it was Game of Thrones,
Hmm.
like, why don't you use
Yeah.
real musicians? At the
Hmm.
time, this new show
Yeah.
probably didn't want to spend the money when a sample
Hmm.
library and one person
Hmm.
could create the sound of a full orchestra,
Yeah.
and it worked,
Yeah.
good enough for them.
Hmm.
I guess someone could
Hmm.
make the same argument. It's like, theoretically, you're kind of taking a job away from a composer, are
Yeah,
you not?
absolutely. Yeah, so there should be regulations for that. I
Okay.
feel like if the budget for a film is over a certain amount, I think there has to be a quota of minimum
Mm,
musicians, like live
interesting idea.
musicians,
Okay.
almost like taxes. Like I think there has to be certain regulations. If you're like a huge corporation, you have to hire a minimum number of musicians,
Sure.
live musicians, or you have if you're and I'm pretty sure people are going to start to find loopholes with that too.
Yep.
Just knowing that humans aren't always always honest,
Yeah.
or they don't really care that much. So I mean that still lies on humans, right? So it's not necessarily the technology; it's more about how humans are going to behave having access to that technology.
Okay.
So absolutely, I think there has to be different things that we have to think about. For example, I don't have $20,000 to hire an orchestra,
Sure.
so I would rather have an actually product to sell without having to wait and not, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that would actually make things really good for me.
Hmm.
And so you know, you have to think about independent artists and up and
Totally.
coming and emerging musicians for sure.
Yep.
So that's why I get a little bit like skeptical when all these huge labels start
Yes.
suing. I'm like, guys, like, you know, this could actually benefit a huge, like these like super low budget movie makers like that don't have the, you know, the resources to create soundtracks, for example, or like, you know, just there's a lot of
No,
that.
and
Like,
you make a fair
yeah.
point there that we can't really trust that these major corporations of the major labels, the major publishers that have historically
Mhm.
been doing the lawsuits, conducting these lawsuits, because they historically, I would argue, have been on the wrong side of history when it came to like
Yeah.
the Napster era, where they were suing fans, teenagers for downloading, quote
Yeah.
unquote, illegally downloading music over Napster. When
Yeah.
I argue that was the wrong approach, that they should have been working with this new
Mhm.
technology to monetize it and to
Mhm.
help the artists. And like, yes, musicians, especially independent artists, historically have always found ways to innovate with new technology and use the technology. Even back in the peer-to-peer Napster era, kind of using it like putting up their bootleg live performances and just like working
Mhm.
with the
Mhm.
technology. It was kind of like tape trading in the jam band era. It's like why famously Dave Matthews was very in favor of Napster, and famously Metallica was very against it, is because like you have one
Mhm.
band that kind of grew up on tape trading and the live experience and showing what the live show
Mhm.
could be, and the others, not. And so you fast forward, and so yes, I fully agree that we have to be
Mhm.
skeptical when it's like
Mhm.
the major labels, the major corporations, trying to dictate what is right and wrong, because
Yeah.
they're not pure. They're looking
Mhm.
out for their shareholders and their bottom line,
Mhm.
and they're just trying to make more money. This is they'll make
Yeah.
the arguments. This is looking out for artists, and like
Mm.
I
Yeah.
you can't ever trust that. So I
Yeah.
think it's a very fair point. And here's a case in point of someone like you, an independent artist, who's working with this technology to advance your own career. And you have found ways to use it in really innovative ways that, yes, I don't think there's anyone else that kind of using it the way that you are, and people are experimenting. And
Mhm.
so it is fascinating. Now, where do you see this technology and how you're going to work with it? Where is it moving, and what are you working on now?
So I am actually working on, as I said, like collaborative ways.
Yeah.
So I have various tracks where the AI and yeah, for me, it's like it's a really fun thing to do. So I have tracks where I'm playing with an AI pianist. So
Whoa.
I'm improvising on top of an AI.
Huh.
And then I just did, this is really cool. Last week I was in San Francisco at a conference,
Mm-hmm.
and I premiered a Mozart AI where I generated Mozart's images. And then with a studio, they actually animated it based on my conducting.
Wow.
So I did like a green screen conducting and of the music that was AI music,
Yeah.
but in the style of Mozart that
Huh.
I kind of built. So it wasn't just me just generating, but also putting together a whole piece in response. And somehow I found a way to create a coherent piece of music that was in the style of Mozart, and it was like orchestra and piano. So there is piano solo parts where I'm playing live,
Yeah.
and Mozart is conducting me at the same time. So I'm
Ha.
looking at the video
Wild.
of Mozart
Oh
conducting
my
me
gosh.
in and then in real time I'm adapting to his conducting,
Whoa.
and then the robots come and start playing, and it's just like awesome. So I see more of this, more of a physical world where, so like my goal is to then have the the pianos like that move, like the keys will move, and I can have a show in 10 different cities, and people can have like immersive experiences, and they can learn about these composers too. So
Cool.
I
I
like
like
a
that.
big part of it is really to teach people like why these composers were so great and like learn more about them, and then also to play their original works as well. Like, so it
Okay.
wouldn't be just AI composed music of like
Right.
Chopin, Beethoven, but also in my one of my beta versions, I did like a little show, which is kind of like a kind of not public yet. Let's say I might premiere it somewhere very big soon, so I won't talk about it.
Okay.
But it's essentially like it wasn't just music, but it was it was like Chopin came to life. Like he actually talked to us.
Wow.
So I trained like an actual Chopin AI, and he
Wow.
was talking about his compositions and like truthfully, like the right places, right time with the right people, and he would just talk about those things and even create stories. And it was kind of an interesting and creepy experience. I'll definitely invite you to the next one.
Please, that
Like,
sounds wild. I mean, the pace of AI, of innovation right now and development and what is in the AI space, I mean, is just wild. And it's cool to see an actual musician, an actual composer that has been trained and has studied this and has the background, work with these tools and with this technology and
mhm,
use it in these very innovative ways while paying homage and respect to
mhm,
the
yeah.
history and to these composers
Mhm.
and all of that. Uh, Very fascinating to see and to see where it's heading. This, I mean, we could talk for hours. I do want to
Yeah.
about all of this. It's so crazy. So I appreciate you going in and deep on this with me. But I feel like we got to call it there for now. But I have one final question that I ask everyone who comes on the show, and that is, what does it mean to you to make it in the new music business?
I would say it's to leave a legacy.
Love it. Easy. Done.
Yeah.
AyseDeniz, thank you so much. That was great.
Thank you so much.
Today's episode was edited by Ari Davids with music by Grassroots District and produced by all the great people at Ari's Take.